The Eternal Series Radio presents The Nephelium by author Nathan Parks. Copyright 2013. Episode 2. A letter to the Jewish historian Josephus from the Apostle John the Beloved. Kept within the archives of the Watchers, the only known letter or reference to a connection to what has been referred to as the Revelations, the clans of the fallen and the alliance. Many have questioned the letter's authenticity, and even some Watchers have suggested that John had become delirious from his time on Patmos and was not present at the Council of Shammah. Greetings and peace to you, Josephus. I was afraid that this letter is received within your hands with not much joy. I wonder how close you still remain to the cause of the Watchers. I understand that during my exile you fought for the release of many of our brothers and even gained some, but at what cost? Mortal man believes what they will believe, but we cannot deny what we know to be true. Lucifer was alive and well within Titus, and we must mark the fall of the temple as a victory for the fallen. It is understood that you were able to procure the records of the Brotherhood and also the written lineage of the Jerusalem breed. Were you able to hide the vial? Neither it nor the records of the Jerusalem breed must fall in their hands. I know that I need not remind you of your duties, even if you have fallen away from the true faith. There are signs that have been given since the War of the Serpents on what choices may be made and what the consequences of those choices would be. Where immortals have fallen short is in understanding the free will of man that could set everything into motion or change the course of it all. Where mortals have fallen short is in the belief that all can be reasoned, understood, and discovered, and that the course has been set in stone. They argue over the trivial details as if their mortal understanding has discovered and figured all that is to be figured out. They fall short. If one piece of the puzzle is not understood, then the whole picture can never be understood. Mortals have put pieces of the picture together here and there, but all have been distorted by their own prejudice, thirst for power, eternal struggles, and different cultures to the point that the complete picture has been blurred. During my exile, I was taken up out of my body into the halls of the Arch Council, and there I was told to keep record at the Conference of Shammah. I must tell you that the mortals will not fully understand the revelation that I have been asked to record as one of the Watchers. But I must tell you, Josephus, the battle for mortals has just begun. If certain choices are made and history is not changed, then there will be a battle for eternity that mortals will not understand, nor will they survive. A battle made from the thirst for blood and power. A battle of what mortals will call vampires. It will be a clan war, and all I can say for now is that it will come down to the choice of one. The Jerusalem breed will be more vital than any could have imagined. The choice of one marks us all. Another Watcher, John. Chapter 1. The nights were actually the days to so many of the city's residents. Eve had often considered having the Broken Tear, her small but well-visited tattoo parlor, open throughout the night. She was sure that it would bring a completely new face to her customers. But then again, she wasn't willing to work those hours. It had been raining earlier, but now the dark cover of clouds overhead had given up its last sorrowful droplets of liquid and left instead small mirrors for those whose heads hung low enough to look down into them. With all the potholes, the puddles were not hard to find. This was her city, and Eve loved it. She loved the caverns and the valleys of it all. To outsiders it may seem overwhelming, but to those who have been born here, grown up here, and most likely one day would die here, it was home. One carved out their small niche in it all, and never worried about the rest. The nights here were truly different from the days. In the evenings, many feared walking the streets. It was true that shadows could hold unwanted dangers, but it was part of the territory, and one lived, or one didn't. It was their choice. The lights from all night diners, clubs, and retail stores offering things of lesser moral value, all blended together for an iridescent glow that lit her path through the maze. A taxi would honk here and there. However, she paid no attention. Tonight she really was enjoying the walk, and she wasn't even sure where she was going. She wouldn't say that her soul was troubled tonight. But tonight? Well, she could say that tonight was just one of those nights when she really could go for a corner booth at Alfonso's Cafe and some strong coffee, topped off with solitude. Demons haunted her mind, and she needed to discover some peace before she would even consider going home and turning in. At 27, Eve was a strong and independent woman. Beautiful? Well, she knew she was eye-catching, but she was far from conceited. Popularity was something she never found time to pursue. Of course, growing up as an orphan, one didn't worry about frivolous things such as who was popular and who wasn't. If one was an orphan, they weren't popular. No, instead, they were only a quick welfare check for someone in authority who was considered fit to be their foster parent. Who cared what happened to the child behind closed doors? Whoever compared it to hell? Well, there was nothing to really think about. That was all locked into its own filing cabinet, and the lock didn't need to be broken into. One learned very quickly how to survive and how to live by instinct. Alfonso's Cafe was on the corner coming up on her right, and she felt a slight sense of peace as she caught sight of the familiar neon glow of the steaming Cup of Joe sign that hung in the large window. It wasn't a yuppie coffee joint or even a trendy chain cafe. It was Alfonso's. The inside of the cafe was decorated with raw red brick walls, small lights placed here and there, accentuating small Italian cafe-style tables and chairs. There were one or two booths toward the back, out of the soft glow of the lights, which allowed a simple solitude of sorts. In fact, this had been where the now graying Alfonso found a younger Eve hiding one night at closing. Instead of reprimanding her or sternly insisting for her to leave, he simply smiled and brought a mug of hot chocolate to her. He didn't bombard her with a whole bunch of questions that night, but had simply gone about his business of closing the place down and letting her be. He had allowed the scared but strong-willed little girl to stay as long as she wanted that night. He had acted as though he had many other things to do, giving Eve the time to muster the needed courage to face the darkness that awaited her at home. Finally, she got up and walked out. They had not exchanged a single word that night, but that would change over the years. Now, almost 20 years later, he was the closest thing she had ever had to a real caring father. He still knew enough to discern when she needed to be left alone, and was wise enough to say just the right thing when you needed that word of encouragement. Tonight the place actually had several customers, and not too many of them Eve recognized. She nodded at Maria as she headed to her back corner. Maria started working at Alfonso's not too long after Eve had wandered in. She was not as old as Alfonso, but was old enough to be Eve's mother. She had never taken up as much of a position in Eve's life as the elderly proprietor had, but she did care very much for the young woman. Fortunately, the place may have many unusual patrons tonight, but her normal haven of escape was not filled, so she quietly slipped into the familiarity of her surroundings. "The usual tonight, Eve," Maria called out from behind the counter. "No, I don't feel like hot chocolate tonight. Let's make it a double espresso." Maria gave out a loud whistle as she went to work on the order. "Not planning on getting any sleep tonight, I take it," a fellow at a small table to her left stated. Eve was cordial with a weak smile, but in her eyes a message flashed that stated, "This is not your lucky night, man. Find someone else." She looked around at her safe haven. A young couple who looked to be on a date was sitting near the front window, a businessman with a magazine set toward the middle of the store, and then there was her would-be acquaintance sitting just a couple of feet away from her. A few others dotted throughout the cafe looked to be finishing up. She leaned her head back and looked up at the old photographs from Italy that she had blown up and framed for Alfonso. She'd always cherished the day that she surprised him with these gifts. He loved Italy, and he would always bring out old photographs and talk long into the night about the past and the things that meant so much to him. It had taken careful planning by her, Maria, and Megan, another castaway of sorts, whom Alfonso had unofficially adopted, to get the photos carefully out of the albums and to a special frame shop. They had chosen old-style frames and had even gotten an electrician all lined up to come in after hours one night, once Alfonso was gone, to hang the special lighting. Alfonso had wept. Eve smiled at the thought. The photos now embraced her when she needed an escape. She would leave the little cafe behind in her mind and travel to the streets pictured within the photos. Maria dropped off the dark brew of insomnia as she made her way toward another table. Eve called out to her, "Hey, where's Alfonso tonight?" As it dawned on her that she had not seen her mentor, nor had heard his jovial voice. "Went home early, not feeling good," Maria stated over her shoulder as she dropped off 2 dark chocolate mochas for the couple toward the front of the cafe. "Alfonso, your boyfriend?" It was the "I don't have a clue" guy from her left again. "He must truly be a lucky guy." "And how would you know that?" Eve asked, sarcasm oozing thickly from her lips as the first sip of her espresso poured down the back of her throat. "I mean, really, you don't know anything about me, and I could be the next closest thing to a serial killer. So he actually wouldn't be very lucky now, would he?" "Yeah, I suppose you're right," he said, nodding his head as if he was actually giving that some thought. "Let's just say that I have a knack for reading people. And from what I'm reading, you're not a serial killer. Troubled some, true. No killer." Eve was feeling an agitation rising up from somewhere deep within her. Here she needed some quietness and solitude in order to calm the struggles within her. But instead, she discovered some guy who thought he was a kind of mystical psychic who was learning to expand just past palm reading. "Listen," Eve paused slightly, hoping the man would fill in the blank with his name. "Kedar." "Okay, Kedar. I don't mean to be rude or nasty, or even to use your words, troublesome, but I really am far from the social type, and right now I have no interest in turning over a new leaf and deciding that it's time for a new friendship. So, if you don't mind, I would really just enjoy spending time with my espresso, my thoughts, and..." "You mean your demons?" "My what?" "Your demons," Kedar repeated. Of course, uninvited, Kedar had now stood up, slid into the opposite side of Eve's booth. "You came here tonight because you're trying to escape your inner demons. You feel that there's something really missing in your life and you don't want to search because you're scared that if you do, it'll require you to regress to your past." "What in the world are you talking about?" Eve snapped at him, her brow furrowed. She was far from agitated now, not just because this guy had now totally invaded her haven, but it seemed that with every word he spoke, he was reaching deeper into her soul and pulling out truths that Eve had no idea of how they were escaping. Kedar was a well-built man, and when he stood up to invade her space, he stood to be about 6 foot tall. He had short, jet-black hair, dark-tanned skin, and strong facial features. His eyes were deep blue, but with a spark that seemed to jump out at Eve, and she wasn't expecting the feeling it brought. It was as if he was able to project into her a desire to get to know him, and no matter how hard she fought against it, at this moment it was as if a supernatural hand had reached out and started pulling her puppet strings. "Please, I'm normally not as bold and forward as this," Kedar offered. "Uh-huh," she whispered beneath her breath. "No, really, I'm not. I apologize, and if you let me start over, I think you'll discover I'm not really that bad." "Kedar, I really am not trying to be rude, but I understand you came here to be alone, not be